Hello, and thanks for joining us on Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman. Paris Schutz has the evening off. We begin tonight with dramatic news from federal court in Chicago. Guilty on all counts. That's the verdict for each of the 4 defendants in the ComEd bribery trial, the most consequential corruption scandal here since the days of Rod Blagojevich. Amanda Vinicky will join us in just a moment with reaction, but first, we'll go to the Dirksen Courthouse where WTTW News reporter Matt Masterson is standing by. Matt, the news just came down in the last half hour or so. Tell us more about the verdicts.
Right, so all 4 of the defendants, former ComEd CEO Ann Pramaggiore, former ComEd lobbyist Mike McLean, executive John Hooker, and consultant Jay Doherty, all found guilty of bribery, conspiracy, bribery, and falsifying ComEd's books in this federal case that went on for nearly 2 months here in the Dirksen Courthouse.
Reaction in the courtroom.
It was pretty subdued. No one shouted out, nothing like that. As the judge went through all of the verdicts, there were 9 charges. Each defendant faced different charges, but each one was a guilty count. He read through them pretty straightforward. It was not any shouting or anything like that. Like I said, it was pretty undramatic, but surprising. I think that it was all guilty on all of these counts.
Right. So any idea on like sentencing and what that might be? What kind of sentences the defendants can expect?
Right. So the top charge that they were all 4 convicted on was bribery conspiracy. They each face up to 5 years in prison on that. We won't know more about what their sentence actually is until a sentencing date is picked. That was not set in court today, but we'll know more about that, I'm sure, before long.
All right, and Matt, it looks like folks are getting some reaction there behind you, so we will let you get back to covering the story. Matt Masterson, thank you so much. And of course, Amanda Vinicky joins us now with more. Amanda, we know that you cover Springfield and the State House for quite some time. Remind us what this case came down to.
So, Brandis, I want to say, first of all, just how major this case is, because even though he was not actually on trial, the focus of it, of course, is former Illinois House Speaker Michael Madigan, who himself is historic, the longest-serving House Speaker, not just in Illinois, having been in that position from 1983 until 2021 for all but a couple of years. So not just in Illinois, but in the nation. And he was thought to be somebody who was untouchable, who was so careful, that knew the law because he was the one that really wrote it, that he would not do anything to breach it, that he could sort of skirt the outsides. And in fact, that's what you heard the defendants argue, is that, you know, this may not feel good, it may seem unseemly, and the jurors might not love this about politics and lobbying and how sort of the sausage is made in Springfield, but that it's on the up and up. And we saw the jury, apparently, again, we don't know, of course, what went on in their, 5 days of deliberations, but we do know that they apparently said this is corrupt, this is beyond that. And by the way, Madigan, it's not just this trial, he himself will be on trial, as will one of the defendants, his close confidant, Mike McLean, the lobbyist there. They were charged subsequently in March of 2022. So Madigan is going to be in court in April, and that is somewhat related to this ComEd situation, but also he is believed to, prosecutors allege, that he reaped benefits illegally by steering work to his property tax law firm.
And considering that, you know, that this case was so closely related to him and to his own case that we know, as you said, is coming up in April of next year, what does that mean for him? What is the likelihood for him?
If I were him, it does not bode well. He has not spoken to the press, and he continues to insist on his innocence. He says, in fact, that a lot at the heart of this case was, again, that these individuals were, that ComEd 4, as they are known, were alleged to have sort of gotten this scheme where they didn't share who was going to be hired on the state lobbying forms and such. These were all subcontractors, but they were subcontractors with connections to Madigan. So this is while, by the way, ComEd was working to get legislation passed in Springfield that turned the tide for the utility that had been financially distressed and now made millions and millions of dollars through rate increases. And so what this means for Madigan, we don't know. Again, he denies that he did anything wrong, but it wouldn't be great if I were him. This is bad news.
Bad news for him. All right, obviously something that everybody will be keeping an eye on. As you said, a very consequential case, probably
Rocks
the
all
biggest.
Springfield.
Obviously, absolutely, especially since Blagojevich several years ago, the biggest we've seen in Illinois since then. Something to keep following. Amanda Vinicky, we'll see you then.
All right.
Thank you. And now to some more of today's top stories. 16 people were hospitalized after a school bus carrying children with special needs was involved in a crash. The incident occurred this morning in Little Village at 31st Street and Kedzie Avenue. The Chicago Fire Department says 2 adults were listed in critical condition. The 9 students involved in the crash are in good condition. The former chief of operations of the Chicago Police Department is a frontrunner for the next interim superintendent role. Fred Waller spent 34 years at the department. He rose through the ranks during those years and announced his retirement from CPD in 2020. An interim police chief is needed until a permanent superintendent is chosen when Mayor-elect Brandon Johnson takes office. Illinois Attorney General Kwame Raoul moves to protect access to the abortion pill mifepristone. He was part of a coalition of attorney generals urging the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals to reverse a ruling that would restrict the abortion pill. The group argues the decision by a Texas district court judge to suspend the Food and Drug Administration's approval of the abortion pill would do serious harm to access. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled last month to preserve access to the pill for now as it goes through the court process. Movie and television writers in Hollywood go on strike for the first time in 15 years. The Writers Guild of America, the union that represents screenwriters, are calling on major studios to better staff writing rooms and change the way writers are paid for streaming content. The strike is likely to be most immediately noticed by viewers on late-night talk shows and variety shows like Saturday Night Live. The last Hollywood writers' strike lasted for 100 days. The city's Divvy bike share system is expanding.
Having Divvy bikes in this community is a step definitely in the right direction, because more bikes and stations means more riders and more ways for folks to ride on the south side.
The Chicago Department of Transportation says it'll add 3,000 new pedal bikes to its fleet over the next 2 years. It's also adding hundreds more Divvy stations on the northwest, southwest, and far south sides. The company Lyft, which partners with the city to operate Divvy, says use increased during the pandemic and ridership is 60% higher than it was in 2019. Up next, how Pontiac Prison fits in with the neighborhood around it. Stay with us.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
We first told you yesterday about the living conditions for people incarcerated behind the walls of Pontiac Correctional Facility, 99 miles southwest of Chicago. The conditions are harsh enough that advocates are calling for its closure. But neighbors around the prison say it has a purpose in their community. Pontiac, Illinois, population almost 11,800. Home to Abraham Lincoln's early days, Route 66, and the Cup and the Scone Coffee House.
I just retired and I really like Pontiac. It's a great town. I love the people, I love the history, I love Route 66.
The town is also home to one of only 3 maximum security Illinois state prisons. Just outside its doors, a neighborhood of single-family homes and a playground. Part of the community, says Cup and Scone owner Scott Cranford. He retired from the Illinois Department of Corrections before settling here.
I work there. I drive by it. My wife is out jogging and she's going to go by the prison. It has a great walking path. I've coached junior football out there. When my son played JFL, we practiced right next to the prison.
They have over 540 employees, which many of them live here with us. You know, they're our neighbors.
Pontiac Mayor Bill Alvey argues the prison is also a critical part of the town's economy.
They use our sanitary system and different things. You know, they have to pay the bill too. But when you have over 500 people working here, the economic impact from those people spending money here is tremendous.
But advocates say none of that is reason enough to maintain a prison that is in such bad shape, both physically and as an institution.
We cannot keep prisons open as a source of economic vitality for communities. That is just inherently flawed. Prisons should not drive our economy. They have a specific purpose. We're not even living up to that purpose. They cost us, hundreds of millions of dollars a year.
Jennifer Vollen at the John Howard Association, which advocates for the incarcerated, argues if the combination of short staff and poor conditions inside the prison aren't enough reason to close it, the facility's failure to meet its main purpose of rehabilitation should be.
While there is a goal to rehabilitate, we really haven't come close to touching that.
Some elected officials representing Pontiac have expressed concern about the prison's dwindling population, fearing its closure after the medium security unit was shut down last year, sending inmates to other facilities. Former Department of Corrections Director Rob Jeffries has repeatedly said closure is not on the table.
At that time, I told them that I was not closing the facility. Emphatically told them I was not closing the facility. The action that were happening at these particular facilities, because our population had reduced, was to consolidate our resources.
But we caught up with Jeffries, who acknowledges some of IDOC's facilities are more than 100 years old, facing billions of dollars in deferred maintenance and a host of other issues.
Our population is significantly lower. We're down about 28,000 compared to about 39,000. And with that, we have an opportunity to reduce our footprint. And by reducing our footprint, we can also consolidate our resources.
We don't need as many prisons as we have open in the state of Illinois. With a lower population than we've had in decades, it's time to shut prisons down.
But Scott Cranford argues the prison is serving its purpose beyond just being an economic driver for the city. He points to one of his own staffers who's formerly incarcerated.
Works very hard for me. He's got a key to my business. If you had asked me that 15 years ago, I would have said, yeah, no way, but he's a good guy. People can rehabilitate if they want to.
And in testimony before state lawmakers, the John Howard Association points out that deferred maintenance for IDOC facilities statewide is over $2.5 billion, meaning IDOC has led other state agencies in deferred maintenance costs for the last few years. JHA also points to the master facilities plan that IDOC has ordered. In 2022, the agency contracted with a company called CGL to evaluate all of its facilities and make recommendations. Last month, Rob Jeffries told WTTW News that it would be finalized in a couple of weeks. Still no time frame from IDOC on its release or when a permanent director for IDOC will be named. Mayor Lori Lightfoot's office has plans to use the old South Shore High School on the south side to house asylum seekers and migrants from Texas. Similar action was taken in the nearby Woodlawn community, where the shuttered Wadsworth campus was turned into a migrant shelter. City officials are calling this a humanitarian crisis, with stretched resources and few housing options now that more than 8,000 migrants have arrived. Joining us with reaction to these plans are LaShawn Brown, housing advocate and South Shore Works and founder of the Village Network, a housing education nonprofit, and Benji Hart, a member of Southside Together Organizing for Power, known as STOP. He's also a resident of Woodlawn. We also invited the mayor's office to send a representative, but they did not respond to our request. LaShawn and Benji, thanks to the two of you for joining us. LaShawn, let's start with you, please. What is your reaction to the city's decision to turn the former South Shore High School into a shelter?
Unfortunately, the reaction is that this is news. Primarily, just receiving this news and finding out about it, the first thing that the concern is with the stakeholders in the community is that there's no transparency. We have the South Shore Compact, which is an organization of stakeholders and leadership in the community to make sure that these types of things do not happen. It's extremely important that conversations happen with the community. Our neighborhood, the South Shore community, has long been in need of additional resources. As well, we've been dealing with issues of concern with regard to disinvestment and now reinvestment, that we are such a hot area. So to receive this news and to learn about a facility that has been a mainstay of the community and has been promised to the community for its use, now it's after more than 10 years after its closing, we are extremely shocked and and not appreciating the fact that we don't have a say and we don't understand why our community has been chosen in light of the issues around the culture. We don't have Spanish-speaking community. We don't have ESL in our schools, and we really are lacking resources to match the social services to match the needs of asylum seekers. We know that there's probably a lot of trauma in this community.
Concern about whether the community can provide what is needed for the migrants as they're coming in. And obviously it sounds like a lot of concern about the way the city went about making this
Absolutely.
happen. We know the city's hosting a community meeting in South Shore this Thursday for people to voice their concerns. The same was done in Woodlawn when moving migrants into the former Wadsworth Elementary School. Benji Hart, are these meetings effective?
They're really not. I think the meetings that we had in Woodlawn prior to Wadsworth being converted to a shelter were really just, I would argue, ways for the city to give people an outlet to sort of let off steam and frustration without actually listening to the needs and concerns of residents, and while still going ahead with the very undemocratic plans to convert these schools into shelters. And for us as a predominantly Black Woodlawn-based organization, our issue with these meetings were really that they just became sort of a way for local residents to voice xenophobia and racism rather than actually being structured in a meaningful way to bring communities together and to help help communities advocate for the things that we all need, that long-term residents as well as migrants and recent arrivals both need, which is exactly what the other panelists just named, bilingual education, funding for our schools rather than just converting closed schools into shelters, expansion of affordable housing. These are the things that we need, and these are the things that migrant communities and long-term residents both benefit from. And that's not what the city is offering at these meetings. That's not what the city is trying to hear at these meetings.
And Benji, I want to come back to, sort of that solidarity between the communities in a little bit, but Alderwoman Michelle Harris, who represents the South Shore, did send us a statement saying, quote, "I cannot support housing migrants at the old South Shore High School building. Like many, I have questions and concerns about the safety, humanity, and funding of more migrant housing throughout our city. This site is one of the last facilities available to house migrant families." Now, the city, LaShawn, they have said that they are working with community-based organizations and local leaders on this. What kind of collaboration would you like to see? And have you seen that happening at all?
Well, absolutely not. There has not been any pre-planning collaboration whatsoever. And like he said, we anticipate that this meeting would just be an opportunity to just hear voices of the community, but we hope that we will have a say in what's to take place. As to whether it should even happen, I do not believe that our community has the resources or is the best fit for asylum seekers who have a tremendous amount of social service needs, as well as cultural and so many different things that can be offered from the city. And we understand that there have been many asylum seekers who were just sent from Texas to Chicago and dropped off. And South Shore has a history of being dumped upon with residents just a couple of decades ago, and we are still suffering from this. We don't have the social services to match. Many residents, renting residents, were moved from the Robert Taylor homes when they were torn down, and they were moved directly into the South Shore community. None of the money and resources, social services that were matching those, the housing, that did not come along with, and we are still without.
Sounds like you're still concerned that that could happen again.
Yes.
I want to get to a soundbite really quick, because there are some migrant families, as you've mentioned, who've recently arrived. They're staying in police stations. They've been staying there for weeks now amid a shortage in housing for them. And we did speak with the Little Village Community Council, who's on the ground helping some of these families. Here's a bit of that.
They brought them here to the council, and we said we can't house them because this facility can't house people. So they said drop them off at the police station. So you have families since 2 months ago from Colombia, Venezuela, even some Romanian families came in. There's 3 families, total 12, 4 children, and 1 is pregnant, and she's laying on the floor.
Benji Hart, we mentioned this earlier. You've called for solidarity between immigrant communities and Black Chicagoans. How can you foster that kind of solidarity?
I think the fact that we're experiencing this crisis and new residents who are coming to the city are sleeping in police stations and abandoned schools says everything about what the city's priorities have been, what the city's priorities in terms of funding continue to be, and exactly why that's failing to meet the needs both of recent migrants and of long-term residents. So for me, what solidarity looks like is creating spaces where Black and Brown, immigrant and non-immigrant communities can build relationships with each other. But that, again, as folks have already mentioned, that requires resources. And I think what we're seeing with this crisis is where the resources in our city are actually lacking and where they've been misspent. And so for me, solidarity also looks like raising the demands that Black communities, immigrant communities, Brown communities have been raising over the long term, which is to defund police and social services and put those actually into the things like education and housing, which are what we all need.
And Benji, you're getting a head nod from LaShawn Brown here as well, so I know the two of you agree, but that is where we're going to have to leave it. LaShawn Brown and Benji Hart, thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
And there's a link to register to Thursday's community meeting on our website. Up next, one of Lincoln Park's oldest residents bids farewell. We explain right after a look at the weather. Lincoln Park Zoo says farewell today to an old friend, a tree that's been around longer than the zoo itself. The bur oak, thought to be 300 years old, may be gone, but its legacy will live on in some interesting ways. WTTW News reporter Patty Wetley joins us with more. Patty, you've been covering this tree for a bit. First, tell us about this tree.
Not 300 years.
Not 300 years. Are you sure? But why did it have to come down?
Well, they noticed that it stopped leafing out a couple of years ago. It's about 80% dead at this point, and one of the biggest concerns is it's right on a popular pathway, right where the Gibbons house is, and there are concerns that a limb could drop. I heard, something as small as a quarter-size limb is going to do some damage to a person when it falls. So they felt like it needed to come down.
Okay. What do they hope to do with the tree's remains?
So many things. I had to put a cheat sheet together.
That's okay.
The great part is that it wasn't hollow, so they'll be able to do a lot of the things that they were hoping to do. For starters, the Morton Arboretum has already taken some cuttings, so they're hoping to propagate the next generation of bur oak. They'll be able to do some art pieces, maybe some children's play structures. The great news is that because it wasn't hollow at the base, they'll be able to see all those rings and tell us how old the tree actually is. And the Illinois Archaeological Survey is getting involved, going to be doing some research on that base to see how climate change might have played a role. You can tell by the rings and how they're spaced out what maybe the weather was like and what kind of conditions this tree experienced in 200 to 300 years.
Okay, so before we run out of time, you were at today's tree cutting. Here's a little bit of sense of the mood today.
It's sort of bittersweet in the sense of, today is goodbye, and it's coming down pretty quickly, but we are feeling very excited about the future legacy of this tree.
Patty, have members of the zoo's horticulture team, have they been surprised by the response from the public?
So excited, surge in visitors asking, where's the oak tree? And for them, it's maybe the first time people have really looked at the grounds and not just the animals at the zoo. So it's been very exciting for them from that perspective.
Okay, I'll be curious to see if we can propagate the future of the bur oak at the Morton Arboretum. Patty Wetley, thank you so much.
Thanks, Brandis.
And you can read Patty's full story on our website. That's WTTW.com/news. And that's our show for this Tuesday night. Join us tomorrow night at 5:30 and 10. We leave you tonight with music from singer-songwriter Gordon Lightfoot. Lightfoot died yesterday in Toronto at the age of 84. Back in 1979, he gave a memorable performance just down the hall from this studio on WTTW's Soundstage program. In a moment, the song Sundown by Gordon Lightfoot. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thanks for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a proud sponsor of diversity, equity, and inclusion-focused free continuing legal education for lawyers throughout the region.